Hello and welcome to this review of some opening traps. And so in these traps, even if you don't play these specific openings, these are just some random traps that the themes in the traps you may be able to use in different openings. And so I just thought we could check those out. And so this first one, let's see, it begins with d4, knight to f6, and then bishop to f4. And this could possibly occur in a London system opening where people play d4 and bring a knight to f3 and a bishop to f4. And so let me turn on the analysis and the evaluation. And so this little trap consists of c5 being played here, and then it continues with knight to f3, a kind of a London system setup here. And then after a capture of this pawn, we have, if the knight were to capture here, this is a mistake that white must watch out for, and if you're playing black, be aware of this if white does this. Now you can just play e5, forking these two pieces, and if the bishop tries to capture, then you just have queen to a5, forking the king and the bishop. So that's a quick little trap that you should be aware of, especially if you're playing against a London system. And these forks like this, they could pop up in other openings as well. And so let's move on to a different opening trap here. All right, and so in this one, the game begins with d4, knight to f6, c4, and then e5, the Budapest Gambit. So this is not something that's too common, but you may come across this in blitz or rapid games. And so after this capture, the knight moves here to g4 to attack this pawn here. And then if the pawn is protected, the other knight comes in to pile up on this pawn. And then after knight to f3, we have a check by this bishop. And then if white blocks with the knight here, then the queen adds more pressure on this pawn. But also white must be careful here. As soon as this queen lines up on the king, even though there's two pawns in between, white should be very careful here what he does next. And after a3, chasing this bishop, if the bishop is ignored and a capture occurs here, white must not go after this bishop. Otherwise, we see what happens here. So the bishop has been captured, but now this allows knight to d3 here with a mate. So this is a theme to watch out for anytime the queen lines up on your king at any point in the game, but in the opening, especially if your king is cramped in like this, where all his pieces are trapping the king, then it could possibly allow this smothered mate here where the knight swoops in and the queen pins this pawn so it cannot capture here. All right, let's go on to another opening trap possibility. And so in this one, we have c4, the English opening, and e5 in response. And then developing by both sides. And white brings out the knight, so does black. And now here white has played g3, which is typical in this opening, preparing to bring his bishop up here to g2. And so now this knight to d4 move is played. And so here, according to the computer, the best recommended move is just to continue with development here, moving bishop to g2. But if white got greedy and tried to snatch up this pawn, then we have queen to e7. Once again, the queen is lining up on the king, and the king is, trapped in by his pawns and pieces. And so here white has to be very careful. White should play f4, which is the recommended move by the computer, but even so, black is a little bit ahead, even in this position, which could play out like this. And here, see, the king had to move out because the bishop could capture this knight and the pawn would be pinned by the queen. So here, white is already unable to castle. The evaluation shows the game is even, but black is ready to castle queenside, and white is a little uncoordinated and can't castle. And so the trap involves, as soon as this queen to e7 move is made, alarm bells and red flags should go off in white side of the board, asking, why is this queen lined up on my king? What can it do? And if white is not careful and just retreats his knight back, well, then we would have knight to f3, mate once again here with a smothered mate because this pawn is pinned by the queen. And so that is a important theme to watch out for in any part of the chess game, but especially if these opening traps come into play. All right, let's look at another example here of an opening trap. All right, so we have e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, knight to c3, the three knights opening. And then here is a theme where pawn is pushed forward here on the g file, preparing for the bishop to come in to g7 and try and exert pressure down the middle. And then if we have d4, capture, here knight to d5 is played, jumping this knight into black's position, and then after developing with the bishop to g7 to try and cover this pawn with the knight, we have bishop to g5. And here the knight at c, the c file here should be brought up to e7 to block this attack on the queen. But if if black is not careful and he thinks, oh, well, I'll just move this knight, which will allow me to castle next, then that could lead to knight capturing, and if the bishop captures, and then the queen, and it appears that black can just capture the queen. But then we would have this theme here where the knight jumps into this hole, delivering check, and the king must move, and then this bishop jumps in. And so these pieces take advantage of these weak dark squares around this fianchettoed position where the bishop has been exchanged off and cannot protect these weak dark squares. And so this position may be hard to come about from any specific opening that you play, but the theme is common, something to watch out for in any parts of the game, opening, middle game, and even towards the end game, this weakness of these dark squares when the pawn has been pushed forward and the dark squared bishop of blacks has been exchanged off. And so let us look at another one here. Let's see. Okay, so in this position, e4, knight to f6 is played. And this is the Alekhine's defense. And normally white would push forward and chase this knight away. But we have a different move, knight to c3 here instead. And now d5, putting more pressure on this e-pawn. And so white captures, the knight captures. And here, instead of further capturing, we have knight at g to e2, and then developing the knight by black, and here g3. So preparing to bring this bishop up to g2, and now the knight jumps in here to d4. And so it looks like this knight is just being given away, and this knight as well. So in this position, instead of this bishop capture after knight to d4, h3 should be played. I believe that was recommended by the computer. Let's take a look. Or f3. But f3 could just lose this pawn, and so if white didn't want to lose the pawn, h3 could be played, and then knight captures, and the game could continue like this, where even then black is in the lead here if the game went in this direction. And so if we look at this evaluation, black is ready to castle queenside with a check on the king, and so black would be ahead. But it would be better than capturing here on with the bishop on d5, because then this allows the continuation here where the queen captures, and then after the knight captures the queen, and once again the knight should not capture the queen. It looks like f3 is a better move, but even then, after these moves here, it looks like black is just ahead once again by 2.5 pawns worth of material. And so if the queen was captured, then we have once again this theme of taking advantage of the squares, the weakened squares around this fianchettoed position after this pawn has been pushed forward, and here it's the light squares, and the light squared bishop has been traded off. And so after a check, the king moves and a mate is delivered here. So this is just a theme to be aware of, not only in opening traps, but once again in the middle game all the way to the end game, taking advantage of these weakened squares here. Okay, let's look at one more opening trap. And this game begins with e4, e5. Let's see, bishop to b5 here. So we have the Ruy Lopez opening. And then after bishop to c5, we have castling by white. And then here the knight decides to develop to e7 to back up this other knight. And then c3 is played with the idea to fortify this d4 square and allow this pawn to jump up to d4. And f5. And already we see white has an advantage here, plus 0.8, so almost a full pawn. And then after d4, the bishop retreats back. And we see here The bishop should not have retreated to b6. It looks like it's a tricky position. The computer recommends f capturing here on e4, attacking this knight. But in the game, the bishop retreated. And then we have d5 attacking this knight here on c6. And then after a capture, attacking white's knight, we have knight to g5. And then here is the problem. So the computer recommends h6, just chasing this knight away. But we have, it looks like this knight retreating, and now black is in trouble because e6 is possible. And so here we have a different theme. Instead of the king being trapped with a smothered mate, we kind of have the queen being trapped with almost a smothered attack against the queen, where it is trapped in by its own pieces, and this pawn cannot capture because the bishop is pinning the pawn to the king here. And so that is another interesting theme to watch out for. And once again, not only in the openings for an opening trap, but throughout the game, middle game and end game. Just any time pins and smothered attacks are involved, just be aware that this could be a dangerous situation for the defender and a good possible move for the attacker. And so one thing I wanted to look at, if we went back to here, the computer recommended h6, which would be, let's see, this move. And it looks like after that, it's just recommended that the knight retreat and capture on e4, but he would still be ahead, over +1. All right, well, that is all the opening traps that I'll go over in this video. And once again, those traps are just common themes and ideas that can be used in the middle game and end game as well if you happen to come into a position that is similar to those. So I hope this video helped you out a little bit or gave you some extra knowledge to use in your games. And if you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and feel free to leave comments. And also, all viewers and subscribers, remember to leave a comment with your vote for the top chess player of all time. And whoever wins that vote, the top chess player, I will do a video on that player, the top chess player, in the 150th video for this channel, which will be coming up. So thank you and have a great day.